love that you use my favorite song off of the record we did as the intro music.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that might be my favorite one off that record. The song is Umami Syntonic, and I only struggle to remember it because internally we always use the working titles. But thanks for
Yeah.
making that sound good, buddy.
Hey, my pleasure, man.
Hello and welcome to the Imelda MarCAST. Our guest today has played in bands like Rats, Belonger, Weekend Nachos, and is one half of the studio Bricktop Recording. Today we're talking to Andy Nelson.
Hello.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I had to get out of another Zoom thing, and I had to, I don't know if Terry Gross would say this, but I had to make a poopsie, so now I'm here. I'm sure Terry Gross poops.
I wanted to say that as a joke, but then I was like, oh, I don't want to be crass, but I guess that was just reality.
Yeah, I could not contain myself.
Well, hey, you gotta answer the call.
Answer it, I did. I did not let it go to voicemail. I'm like, yes, hello.
Can't leave your ass on red.
Like it's weird to me, like how some people like with on their phone with like text messages or like I don't know Instagram notifications, they'll just keep the red dot there. They won't clear out like the notification. And to me, I guess like I'm obsessive enough where I'm like, dude, you got to clear that. It says like 73 in red messages. You don't. It just drives me up the wall. It's weird.
I specifically turn off those notifications because it gives me anxiety, except for like text messages or emails or whatever. But like on Facebook or Instagram, I don't want to see any fucking notifications because, I will feel the need to go back and clear it. And there's a podcast app that I use periodically. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it for some reason it took all of my. I use it because its search is much better than the stock Apple one, but I don't really use it for listening things. But it carried over all of my normal Apple podcasts to it, and because I don't listen to them on that, it just constantly says I have hundreds of unlistened podcasts, and I need to figure out how to clear them or turn that off because it drives me crazy. So I feel you with regard to having to clear those things. But I just try not to enable those notifications when I think to.
Like before I,
so there's some interesting content for the start of our talk here.
Oh, it's all good, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously I'm new to doing a podcast. I don't consider myself a podcaster, and there's no online certification course for how to do this. So like I'm trying to strike a balance between like doing enough research where I'm not wasting your time and like also winging it enough so it sounds like people talking and not just like some like shitty like webzine interview. What do you like about music? How long have you been playing guitar?
I did an interview kind of like that, and it was for like a semi like a bigger like online blog, whatever, music journalist thing. I was excited. I was excited, kind of nervous because I hadn't done an interview in a long time, and I was like, oh, this will be cool. Like I got all this stuff to talk about, and we did it over Zoom, and it was kind of that, like just reading off questions like from a prompt, and anytime it would feel like it was starting to turn into a conversation, he'd be like, okay, and then go to like the next question, which was like didn't really follow the narrative of our talk or whatever. It was awkward. So I understand that is a tricky balance to maintain.
What's like the most intrusive or awkward interview question you've gotten where you're just thinking like, dude, I'm not answering that?
I honestly, I don't think I've done enough podcast or enough interviews in general to have gotten a question like that. Yeah, I don't think anything's ever really gotten too personal, thankfully. That's, I guess.
So, Mr. Nelson,
what do you got lined up
when you wipe, do you go front to back or back to front? The people want to know.
I'm going to say it's a little bit of alternating. Depends on the type of boy, yeah, this is kind of well, it's like a funny way I can say this without actually getting too gross, because like my parents and girlfriend will listen to this. I mean, obviously they know I shit, but like
Everybody craps, buddy.
that's true.
So it's January 2nd. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
How's your 2020 been? What have you been up to?
I made a loaf of bread. I've played some Grand Theft Auto 3 for PlayStation 2.
Oh, nice.
Been watching some Great British Baking Show, and you know, that's so far for 2021. That's about it. You know, I've done a little reading. That's I never make resolutions, but that's a semi goal for this year, is to actually like read more. So yeah, I mean, it's been pretty low key. I've got some work at the studio, but I haven't gone in yet for 2021. So some mixed work. So yeah, man, just taking it easy.
I didn't know you bake. I don't imagine. I can't picture like metalheads who bake. Maybe that's like a YouTube series.
You know, I only relatively recently I actually was kind of a bread hater for a while. Like there's probably a 10-year period where I never once bought bread, like a loaf of bread or anything like that.
Wow.
I think I just didn't give a shit. I thought it was kind of boring. It's like I also just like never made sandwiches. You know, I think I'm just too lazy to like
to make a sandwich.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like, well, yeah, because I can just like microwave the like Trader Joe's fucking chickpeas or, you know, whatever. I don't eat that badly, but yeah, but when you I don't know what clinched it. I mean, it started during quarantine times, so you know, to save money, looking for something to occupy your time, and making bread felt right. And honestly, like, yeah, fresh bread is pretty sick, and if you can make your own and do cool stuff and take some pride in it, it's nice. So made several loaves over the past few months.
I'm glad you found bread. Next time I record with you, I'm just gonna bring in like a spread of the sandwich materials and put them on like the mixing desk. Just force you to work the faders and knobs and make sandwiches at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that would be a good combination of my skills, I guess. And well, you know, and then you need some time for the bread to proof, to rise, and you know, I can sort of work on other stuff during that time. That's when I can, you know, set up a guitar or anything like that.
So I have a legit question for you. So how has COVID affected operations at Bricktop Recording?
It's been a little rough. So okay, at the start, it was funny because I had a lot of stuff that was booked. You know, I usually book a few months, sometimes 4 or 5 months even in advance. So I actually had a lot of stuff on the docket for the first part of it. So I don't know. It was literally right at the like a week after everything shut down. I had this actually like one of the bigger records I've ever done, because we actually spent like, you know, 2.5 weeks or something recording it. And we had a lot of discussion like, well, should we do this? What can we do? And we just decided to do it. And it was also, we didn't wear masks because I think a lot of people don't remember maybe that at the beginning of the quarantine, like people still didn't really know if like masks were that effective. I mean, there was even a time where people said masks like were a bad idea because you'll be fiddling with it and like touching your face more. People were still really concerned about like touching surfaces. Whereas now it's like, no, it's the air. It's you breathing and sneezing or whatever. But yeah, we were like, okay, well, nothing's open. We can't go anywhere. We're all sort of just in our bubble together, and we did it, and it was fine. It was awesome, actually, because it was like, wow, everyone is like stuck inside. Nothing's open. I'm going to the studio every day and like cracking jokes with these people I really like, working on this record. I think is awesome. So I had a lot of stuff lined up, and it all went pretty well. And then towards the end of the time where I was booked out to, I started to see that I wasn't getting as much like new stuff coming in. It stayed steady enough though, and it sort of now has shifted to more mix work, and less recording stuff, and it's less than I would ideally be doing, but it's fine. I'm not super concerned. I've had a couple people, I've had a couple sessions get rescheduled or canceled altogether, and just because there'd be a scare or whatever. It's still going pretty steady now. And for the last few months, we've been, it's a strict mask policy. I don't even let more than 3 people, including myself, in the control room. And yeah, I mean, it sucks. I ideally would be doing, actually this coming month is pretty good. It's a little bit smoother from here out, but the last couple months have been a little bit slow. But I don't know, there's more than I expected. When things were looking real bad, I was still getting hit up for work, for mix work or recording or whatever. So I'm certainly still getting by, and yeah, saving a lot of money anyway, not going anywhere. So yeah, it's been better than I expected.
I'm glad you've been able to still get some work, because the other week I was talking to the guitar player for the band The Conformists, and he was saying that like there's some concern that like the recording studio that they prefer to go to, like they don't know if it's still going to be around this year or whenever shit gets normalized.
Yeah, I think with Bricktop we're very uniquely fortunate in that the building where the studio is like is not necessary for that building to be there, or in other words, Pete's family, the studio owner, Pete, his family's owned that building for decades, and they run their business out of it, doing woodworking stuff. I maybe but maybe your listeners would like to know.
Yes.
They make big cutting boards, wood and plastic, and they finish them and cut them down to size, do sink cutouts, and they install them, all sorts of, just any kind of like flat expanse of wood or plastic composite material. They do that in the building, and the studio is just sort of like a section of the studio, of the warehouse that we've appropriated for what we do. So the studio being there, if we go 3 months without a single project, the studio is still going to be there. It's all there, and the building will still be, belonging to Pete's family, and they will still have their business. So we can still have our little corner. So we're super lucky in that regard. There's a lot of other studios who just like that space is only a studio, and the studio is the only thing they have to pay bills or rent or whatever. And that's pretty scary to imagine so many of them in the precarity that they're in. So
how did you get started in recording? So like, I guess I asked because I imagine that most recording engineers are also musicians, or are there some recording engineers who don't play in bands, that they just like recording?
Well, the only engineer that I'm aware of who doesn't play any instruments, it's not somebody I know personally. His name is Terry Date, he's like fucking huge. He did like almost all the Pantera records.
Deftones.
Deftones, yeah, absolutely. White Zombie.
I did not know that. Wow.
He did Astro Creep, yeah. And I mean, yeah, he's just Soundgarden. He's like fucking legendary. And he's still active. And yeah, he doesn't play anything. I've listened to interviews with him where he talks about, if that matters or not, and it kind of doesn't seem to affect his abilities or his workflow. But other than him, I think most people are. It's certainly a huge advantage in terms of being able to communicate and understand how bands work and how parts are played. I mean, I got into recording as a musician. I think for the same reason a lot of people get into it, which is you want to just be able to get your ideas down, or you have a band, or you maybe you have like a not great experience in a studio, and which, I sort of did. I had some high school bands, and we recorded a couple times at Elmhurst College, because we heard that there was a guy there who would record, metal bands or whatever, and it came out fine, but it also cost money, and I was not sure what I was going to do with myself after high school, and I heard a little bit about, Columbia College having a recording program, and the more I investigated it, the more it just seemed like, oh yeah, I can do this for, I can record my own bands and not have to pay someone, and I can make it sound the way I want to. And yeah, that worked out pretty reasonably. I would record my bands and record my friends' bands, and eventually, you record enough stuff that more people hear it and want you to do that for them. And yeah, so it kind of just started from me wanting to, be in control of that aspect of my own music, or music I was making with my friends.
The more like I've had experience like in recording studios, I guess the more I embrace learning about recording, because for me it's better to understand it, as opposed to like when I was younger, the only language I had for like being in the studio is like make it sound better. But it's like,
right.
What does that mean? It's like, so now I have a better understanding of like different types of mics and different mic placement and compressors and preamps and all that shit.
Yeah.
But like when you go to school for recording, because like a recording it could be quite subjective. Like how do they grade that in school?
Well, I actually did not stay at Columbia for very long.
Good for you.
I stayed long enough to basically the first 2 semesters you're there, if you're going into the audio program, are obviously fundamental stuff and gen ed stuff, but then you have to actually you have to test into the audio program. So there's like basic stuff like acoustics and electrical, some very light electrical engineering theory stuff, some math, and then there's some, and then yeah, so it's basic stuff like that. And then and like I think there was like an intro to Pro Tools class or something that I took. And then when you get into the school or whatever, the audio arts and acoustics phase of that is when you kind of start delving more into the nitty gritty. And I only did that for a semester, and I think I had 1 class, and it was still, even that 1 class, it was like with a live sound guy who was really cool, just bringing in different instruments every day and like showing how, here's how you can mic it, here's how this works, here's this microphone, here's how it works. And I don't even remember like what it was graded on. We weren't doing our own live sound or anything like that. Yeah, so I have no idea how they would. It is. There are technical things that are real in terms of like, well, here's how the gear works. Here's how, the directionality of a microphone works or whatever. But, you could also just like do everything wrong from a technical perspective and end up with a cool sounding recording, So yeah, I don't know. I mean, at some level you need to know how the stuff works, but yeah, it is just using your ears, and if you like how it sounds, then go with that. And so much of the job is then trying to translate what other people want. So that's even a thing. I don't even know that's a thing that you can teach in a school, where it's like, okay, working with people and understanding their needs and their vision for their band, and trying to gel with that and bring something to that. I don't know that it's possible to teach that, except for, I guess people internships or something, but even that you don't need a school to do. So yeah, so I wasn't there for very long, but and I don't know that I learned a whole lot of practical stuff, a little bit maybe, but yeah, I mean, most of it is just trial and error. It's like anything, you just have to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my experience at the school with that.
I think that's one thing that like I guess people tend to forget, or I can forget about, like the crucial job of like being an engineer producer is just working with people and managing a bunch of like ne'er-do-well musicians who oftentimes are lazy bums. And I'm really talking about myself.
I mean, you guys definitely had your shit together. You knew your songs, you knew your parts. It was kind of on me I mean, Matt can actually like tune his drums. Like that's amazing. That honestly, like that's yeah. I recall it being a pleasure, but it is still a lot of time management and yeah, keeping the mood light so people can do their best work and play their best. And I just try to be encouraging and open and try to make it a comfortable experience, but also like make sure we're getting done what we need to get done in the time we have. So yeah, that's definitely I think the unspoken biggest part of doing what I do is time management, personality management, and yeah, man, just making the process enjoyable, because I also want to enjoy it.
I mean, that's, I guess, yeah, we forget about that too. The engineer wants to not like hate being with some band. It's like, oh
Yeah,
shit,
I mean,
I've worked with these assholes for like 3 days.
right. And I think I've been pretty fortunate that literally almost everybody I've worked with has been cool. I mean, even like there've been some bands who are like, you know, I just can't, for whatever reason, like I can count on one hand the amount of times this happened, but for whatever reason, I can't like sync up with what they're after. Or we listen to some section of a song and they're like, oh, don't you hear, this thing is like so fucked up. And I'm like, I honestly, like, man, I don't hear it. If you want to redo it, let's redo it. But like, if you're asking me my opinion, I thought that this was great like 5 takes ago. So tell me when it's right, So, but it's once in a blue moon, I think, when I encounter somebody who I can't figure out I can't like, meld with their thing. But yeah, man, I want it to be fun. I like cracking jokes, that was certainly a nice thing about working with you guys, that you guys like and get jokes. Cause yeah, man, I think if the more comfortable everybody is, then the better everyone does, including me. So that's certainly, I think if I could name a strength I have, I hope that would be one of them.
And I think you were also able to tolerate Imelda farts, because I'm sure I cut a few gassers in studio.
I mean, farts are always funny no matter what. I mean, like it could be unpleasant if it's the door is shut in the control room. I mean, it's pretty well insulated in there, so nothing's going anywhere if it's in the room. But yeah, I mean, certainly the fart sound is funny forever. So
yeah. Have you ever recorded a fart for an album?
Not for an album, but I did have a band in kind of recently, and one of the guys in the band just like, he just farts nonstop. It's crazy, actually. I don't know if he's got some kind of, dietary thing or a gut health issue, but he's always farting. And we were doing vocals, and I happened to hit record right when he went in and just like opened the door and farted. And the singer was just like, come on, man. And I looped this little clip of like the fart and him going, come on, man. So yeah, one of these days, I do that periodically when I have the presence of mind. So maybe one of these days I'll actually, just take the fart sound and bury it somewhere, or make a sample and layer it with the snare, or something like that. So, yeah, supposedly Joe Barresi, who's a famous producer guy, supposedly he puts a triangle sound on like every record he does.
Oh, really?
Like he likes to sometimes it's not, you don't even know it's there, it's buried somewhere. Sometimes it's actually like part of the song, but he says that he does that on every record he's ever done. So maybe I'll do that with a fart sound.
Do you have a calling card, or is there like a Bricktop or Andy Nelson sound?
I've wondered about this because I know there's certain ways that I like things to sound, I think I'm always trying new techniques and new processing chains, just to try to stay fresh and not stagnate with my skills. All this is to say that I would have thought that I don't, but I've heard from a couple people that I do have a sort of recognizable thing, and I think actually if there's any one aspect that would be common to I and Pete, the other engineer at Bricktop, would be our use of like room mics on the drum kit, and drums just sounding like they were recorded in our room. Like I certainly prefer that sort of drum sound to an ultra dry one. So there's some room mics no matter what in any drum recording I do. Yeah, so that's probably something that's identifiable. Yeah, man, I don't know. I know I like things to sound a certain way, but you know, I have been tricked though, because I still listen to an iPod, and I have it in my car, and I'll put it on shuffle all the time and just let it rip through every song I have on there. And some of it's stuff that I've recorded, and periodically something will come up and I'll be like, oh, this sounds good. And they'll be like, oh shit, this is something that I did. Like, that's a nice feeling. So, yeah. So, I don't know that there's anything like that me being the subject of it can identify, other than maybe the sound of the room on the drums. That's probably the most recognizable thing. Certainly the thing that I care about the most when listening to like almost any record is what the drums sound like. So if other people are noticing that, then I'm sure that's a common feature people listen to.
Yeah, I will say that the drums on Imelda record, Tatlo, it sounds really fucking good. And I've read like frequently that like the most important part of like any record is getting a good drum sound. Like if you don't have a good drum sound, then it's all shit.
That I think is pretty much true of, you know, any kind of rock record. Anything that has live drums in it, or not live drums, you know. I mean, yeah, I don't know why exactly that is. I think it's maybe also because drums are probably the most stylized thing on a record, or the thing you have to do the most to make it have the impact that a listener is, or a musician is after. Like guitar, you know, you could have a fucking finished guitar tone. You put up a mic or two, and that could be it. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds great, you know, with very little fuss. But drums, there's so much more happening. There's so many different pieces and relationships between all those pieces that there's like a baseline amount of processing that you almost have to do if you wanted to hit the way that, you know, at least for me, drums need to sound to have impact. And I think because of that extra bit of detail work with that, it sort of highlights them in a way that other instruments maybe aren't as highlighted. I don't know if that's making any sense, but it's certainly the thing that matters. Yeah,
it seems that it's, from my naive perspective, that like getting a drum sound is maybe the most challenging if you're trying to record like a traditional rock format. Like I've read that like the measure of an engineer's worth is whether or not they could mic a drum kit properly.
I believe it, honestly. I mean, yeah, because, you know, you got a 3-piece drum kit or something, and, you know, you got to have at least one mic on every piece of the drum. You got to have at least a mic, or preferably a couple mics for like the overhead for the cymbal sound. You maybe want to get a couple further away to get some space around them. So, you know, whereas a guitar amp or a bass amp, that could be one mic and be done. You know, a vocal, one mic. I mean, obviously, there's certainly simpler ways to mic a drum kit if you're going for a more vintage kind of sound. But the other thing, though, that's the challenge about drums is it doesn't, you can, a great drummer is like easy no matter what. Like you can't, it's like if you have the bare minimum fundamentals of like how to put a microphone on something, and record that into, you know, whatever format. If the drummer is good, you can just do it. It's fine. Like, you know, drummer who's in control of their dynamics and like hits right, and preferably knows how to tune their drums, or if you are able to tune the drums, like I normally have to do. Conversely though, and you just, and when I have those bands, when I can work with those drummers, it's like, cool. Oh yeah, I can do this. I know how to do my job. But if you get a drummer that's not so good, maybe doesn't hit well, doesn't, you know.
Like who specifically? Name names. I'm kidding.
Well, no, I mean, it's it can really, those moments, and it's just like, man, am I, you know, the imposter syndrome really creeps in those situations, because it's just like, what am I doing wrong? I can't make this sound good. It's just like, oh yeah, this drummer's like not that good. So it's going to take a lot more work after the fact to really make it work, as opposed to, well, the heavy lifting's done. From here, it can only go up, you know? So yeah, there's a lot of undue, or a lot of unfair burden, I think, placed on drummers in the studio, because I would wager it is the most difficult instrument to play, you know, or the most demanding, at least in a studio environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the thing that everyone cares about, and yeah. So one more reason why I try to keep the mood light, because I don't want them to get in their heads, which so many of them do. So.
Have you ever been in the control room where a band like has like a massive like blowout argument because of like the recording process?
I've had, yeah, not necessarily because of the process. I'm trying to think of, I feel like whenever I have these experiences, I just like bury it so deep because I don't want to think about it again. I mean, there's always like weird, every now and then there's you can feel like a certain tension, and you know, the band's playing and they keep fucking something up, and the singer's sitting with me in the control room, and they're saying, and they're muttering to themselves like, yeah, I told him we need to practice this one more. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I guess it was a good idea to record the one we just wrote last night or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, that's why we're struggling here. And yeah, I mean, and sometimes I will feel like an energy. I don't even think it's ever come to a point where people were like yelling at each other. It's usually more of, if it's there, it's a simmering kind of dull tension that I try to ignore because I just want to keep going. But then you know, it's clear to me that my instincts were, what I was sensing was real when a week after the record comes out, the band breaks up, or literally maybe a couple days after we're done recording, the band breaks up, and it's like, okay, yeah, there was something happening there. Yeah, I mean, I very thankfully have not had to deal with too much of that. And maybe it's because so many of the projects I do are much shorter, where it's like, okay, we have 3 to 7 days to do this record. You know, so it's kind of just like boom, 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 go, go, go. You know, there's not a lot of downtime where someone can be like, oh, actually, maybe we should do it this way, or maybe you should do it like that, or why aren't you doing this or that? You know, there's not a lot of time for, you know, weird, nitpicky moments like that, maybe.
Yeah. So here's a naive question for you. So I grew up with heavy music, and I guess I came of age musically in like the early and mid 2000s when like metalcore was the hot thing. So like listening to like records by Killswitch Engage, like how do they get that slick production sound? Like is it possible to do that in like a DIY budget in like the course of like 3 days, or like is that something where that takes like you need a budget that requires like a week or two in the studio?
Well, I could say for that band specifically, did record in a very nice studio, and I know Andy Sneap has like mixed most of their, if not most, certainly their like biggest records. And Andy Sneap is like, I mean, he's like the fucking god of modern metal production. I would say more than ever, it's very possible to get close to that. I think the one thing that you can't undervalue or whatever is the room that you're working in, particularly for drums. There's a lot you can do now with ambient samples, that is pre-recorded samples of drums that are mic'd from a distance, so you can have that trigger when drums could be recorded in a very small room, and then when the snare hits, you can set it up so that it'll trigger a sound of a snare recorded from very far away in a nice studio elsewhere. So in effect, it sort of is like building in this ambience around dryly recorded drums and approximating a much nicer room than they were actually recorded in. You can only get so far with that. Same thing with reverbs and reverbs that model bigger rooms. But yeah, I mean, it still really comes down to if you have a good player on like a good drum kit, or that, you know, a well-tuned drum kit that's mic'd reasonably well, and you can record all the guitars DI, even vocals, you can record those in a closet with like a reasonable microphone, and you can get pretty far with that. You know, there's a world of drum samples available that you can use to augment, or, you know, ideally not replace, but you certainly could replace. And if you were really into fine tuning the dynamics on those, it would just be a lot of work after the fact.
Yeah.
But you could get pretty far. I still think that, and especially, you know, with amp modeling software too, you know, it's like, oh, okay, here's you know, Adam Dukowitz's profile for whatever amp he used for the end of Heartache, or, you know,
Yeah.
And you can just kind of have that sound. I still think that there's something to be said. To me, and maybe this is like not, maybe I'm fooling myself, and it's like the people who say they can hear the difference between like a high quality MP3 and like a FLAC vinyl rip or something. But to me, there's still like almost like an uncanny valley feeling when there's a record that is really all processed after the fact, but in a natural way, versus just a well done record that's that way from the start. But yeah, man, I don't know. It depends. I mean, so much of like modern metalcore, deathcore stuff is meant to sound like inhuman and like ultra processed and slick. So you could just have at it with replacing drums and using amp sims. And if you know how to fit that together in a mix with processing and everything, yeah, you could, I'm sure you could make a pretty amazing sounding record. So.
All right. So yeah, that's the key to me getting the Adam D guitar sound and like the kill switch shit.
Yeah, just download, you know, I'm sure his, if he hasn't released his own whatever amp profiles, I'm sure some nerds on a message board have like gotten pretty close and put them up to download.
So I know, like, to get like a bigger guitar sound, you have to like multi-track the shit out of it. Like I remember reading about like Rammstein that like one of their records had like 16 guitars on or something like that. Is that
I don't know.
Is that normal? Is that like excessive?
It depends on what you're after, because what happens is it doesn't necessarily get bigger. There's sort of an increase of in density that happens, but it is at the expense of pick attack and I think a certain amount of energy. So yeah, I mean, it can sound cool, and it sort of becomes, like I said, so it loses some definition, but you gain this sort of mass that you can't get any other way. And I think that's cool if you have the time and really, you know, go deep in making sure the performances are tight. Yeah, I mean, if you're really after like that stadium kind of metal sound, that is probably, you know, a given. But I think the faster you play, though, the more technical you play, the more that many guitars I think becomes a hindrance, because, like I said, you start to lose the pick attack definition, you start to lose a lot of the energy in those parts, and it's also just so much more time consuming, because to preserve as much of that as possible, you really have to hyper focus on the details and make sure that every performance is like lockstep with the track you're layering it with. So yeah, I think there's advantages and drawbacks to doing a lot of guitars. Certainly if you're after that kind of stadium sound, that seems to be the way to go. You know, if you want to sound like the Black Album or Def Leppard. Actually, Def Leppard would be more in the vocal department. I think the guitar is actually, it doesn't sound like there's that many layers in a lot of that stuff. But, or, you know, if you're trying to sound like Siamese Dream or something, where it's just like this wall of fuzz, that's how they achieve that. So, but I can't imagine like Cryptopsy doing that.
Yeah, that,
you know,
that
because
would
like
make sense.
Yeah, or yeah, I mean, pick any super technical band. I think you lose a lot of the energy in the process of doing that many guitar tracks.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I guess I asked because, like, I imagine my white whale as a guitar player is trying to like capture how I hear the guitar in my head and getting that to translate to a recording. But then I have to remember that like my ears, which are like total, like very blown out, they're not going to hear the sound the same as a microphone would. So like, I wonder if I just have to like change my own expectations, or if I just have to like do more and more research and like trying to nail some like elusive platonic ideal sound.
That is like a tricky balance, like what you hear in the room versus what you hear through speakers. Because a lot of times that can be radically different, where you could be, you know, if you have, let's say, you know, the cab mic'd and isolated in another room, and you're just listening to like your monitors, and maybe you have your head with you, and you can like, I mean, at the studio, that's what we have a set up like that, where we have a long speaker cable going through the wall, so we could have the head in the control room, we could have the cab mic'd out in the ISO room, and we can dial in a tone, hearing it through the speakers, through the monitors, in like a sort of pre-mixed, and a mic'd, but maybe pre-mixed sort of context. And we might think it sounds great, but then if you go and listen to the amp, it might sound like kind of weirdly different. You know, you might end up with way more treble and way less mids than you'd think would sounded good standing in front of the amp. So there is sort of like a disconnect there, and it depends on the process, because there's some people who have a sound that they really love when they play to it, when they're practicing or playing shows, and it's all about just capturing that, you know, the right microphone choices, the right positioning of those microphones. But then sometimes if you're chasing a sound on an album, there's so much that goes into that is beyond just a mic on a guitar amp, where it's like, okay, you know, there's, you know, they used like all this EQ after the fact. Or I know, like, you know, Carcass's Heartwork, they did a weird thing where they had like a hollowed out, they had like an empty guitar cab, like in front of the cab they mic'd to like extend the low end, or some kind of weird trickery like that, something that you would never have in a live scenario. So yeah, it's definitely tricky to try to chase that kind of sound, like something that you already hear on a record. But then if it's something like, you know, like a Steve Albini recording, where it's pretty not messed with, it's just like putting the mics on the amp and leave it alone, that would maybe be easier to replicate in a live scenario, since it is trying to be more one-to-one. Here it is in the room, here it is through the speakers. I think I ideally for my working, it's probably a combination of the two. I do personally think the amp should just sound good standing in front of it. You should like what you're hearing, and it should feel right. And then it's on me then to choose the right mics and have some reasonable approximation of that as close as possible coming through the speakers. And maybe we have to do a little bit of putzing to push it there, like add a little bit more top end or mids or whatever. But yeah, that's a tricky game, and people spend a lot of time and money chasing those kinds of sounds.
Okay, that really helps because I guess yeah, that helps with me. I guess learning to manage my own expectations as opposed to like I was reading about Van Halen and like he's such a tone nerd where he like obsesses about like the quality of the wood in his guitar and like the feel of frets, and like those are like micro details that like I don't think I give a shit about, and I really don't want to like start going on that road and chasing this like get like this tone dragon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff. I personally, I don't really, a lot of that stuff for me as a guitar player, I don't give a shit. Like if I can play it, like if the guitar will like intonate well and I can play it, that already ticks off several boxes for me. And if it, sounds good coming through the amp, if it like feels right, or if I chug and it's got the right amount of like low end. And if I ring out a more complex chord, can I hear all of the notes within that? I personally have a pretty basic rubric when I'm looking for something. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There are certainly people who are like big time super nerds about that sort of stuff, like Eddie Van Halen. I just watched a rig rundown on Angus Young on YouTube, which is like, they have a box where they're literally like tuning in the wall voltage going to the amps to like get that right.
Like that motherfucker really just plays power chords.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's endless. Actually, there was a cool story about that where he was supposedly in the studio recording, and he couldn't get his guitar sound right. He's working with the producer and he's like, something's not right. It doesn't feel right. And the producer's like, okay, well, what's different about your setup now versus what you do live? And he's like, well, the only thing that's different is I'm not using a wireless. Like, okay, plug in your wireless. And he did. And then it sounded the way it was supposed to. So what had happened was that the wireless itself, it's like an early wireless system. So it wasn't particularly powerful. So they had to actually like build a preamp into the wireless to get boost the signal so that it would reach all the way cleanly to the receiver in whatever big stage they're playing on. But it was actually an extra gain stage that was changing the sound and informing it. So those details add up, man. And I don't think that necessarily means you need to go out and buy a weird whatever 70s wireless system to sound like, if you're trying to sound like AC/DC. But little details add up, but at the same time, I think if it sounds good in the room and it feels good when you're playing it, that's like the majority of the battle. And then get some microphones and move them around and listen back, move them around, listen back until you're happy with what you're hearing. That's probably the best way I could imagine going about it.
Yeah, but I'm an entitled millennial twat. So what plugin free is gonna make me sound fucking amazing?
Well, I mean, apart from the entitlement part, lots of people, they don't have a space where they can make a lot of noise. You're in like an apartment, or you're sharing a space with people who don't want to hear a fucking racket. So sometimes that's what the tools you have to use to make sound. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. But I mean, the sky's the limit, though. That's the other thing. It's just like, okay, you have whatever amp sim plugin or an Axe effects rack or whatever, and there are literally hundreds of thousands of profiles and combinations out there. So certainly you'd have to make some decisions for what sounds good to you.
So I've been picking your brain for a while in recording, and so I would like to shift over in a bit to what are you working on musically. But so we were talking about Terry Date earlier and recording the Deftones, and I think like those Deftones records, like the sound of it is like so good, and it's like there's some of my favorite recordings.
Same.
Do you think like the Deftones guitar sound, especially nowadays, do you think it's mainly because they run it through XFX?
I know that Stephen Carpenter, the guitar player, he's been an early adopter of amp sim, DI guitar modeling stuff. He's been into that for a while. In the Around the Fur album notes, he's got those rack-mounted Marshall power amp preamp things. I don't know if he was running those direct or whatever, but he's always been into that sort of like modularized versions of guitar amps. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That seems to be how he gets his sound. He strikes me as the kind of person who could probably get pretty close to his sound with a variety of amps. But yeah, I mean, that seems to work for him. And certainly they can do that live, where they're playing big ass arenas, or maybe not arenas, but big venues where he can rely on the PA for so much of his sound and not have to worry about having an amp on stage to have a reasonable stage volume or stage sound. They're probably always using in-ears anyway. So yeah, that seems to be working pretty well for him. So yeah.
And then follow up, like I love the Deftones drum sound, and I started reading Tape Op because I want to learn more about recording stuff for my own benefit, so I could next time like I work with you, I'm not just telling you make it sound better, bro. Just make it whatever.
I will say, just to interject there, I think it's useful to develop that vocabulary and just like that skill set of being able to communicate maybe more clearly what you're after. I don't think it's a requisite though. I think a lot of the job should be on me or any engineer to interpret. Obviously, if you just say make it better, I might try to parse that a little bit clearer. Like, okay, well, is there like an example of something you're after, or is it a feel thing, or But I will say, I think any engineer's job is acting as a translator for those kinds of demands, because I don't think that's why you're coming to someone to make the record, is someone who can decode that or can take what you do and represent that flatteringly, through your fucking speakers. So
that is something
I think it's a good idea. The more you know, the more you can learn. I think the better off you are, just in general.
So like speaking to that, like one thing I really liked about working with you is any reference like we throw at you, you immediately understand. And that was so helpful.
I'm very happy to hear that. I listen to a lot of music, man. I certainly with you guys, the sound that you guys have, and
no compliments, please.
Well, okay, it's very it seems to occupy a genre or a set of subgenres that I listen to a lot of. Maybe not a lot of contemporary stuff, but a lot of just the history of noise rock, post punk, no wave, all
Look,
that
bro,
sort of stuff.
We have no influences at all. We exist in a vacuum.
I specifically did not want to name specific bands because sometimes people get really kind of offended by that.
Yeah, which is weird to me. I get it, like from an ego perspective, but it's so weird to like never acknowledge the people that like inspired you. It's mind-boggling.
I get it at some level, because no one wants to be accused of not being original
Yeah.
or of plagiarizing. But at the same time, it's like, dude, you like XYZ bands or genres, which is why you play this music. So it's coming from somewhere. So, and for me personally, if I like say, oh, dude, I really love this part. It reminds me of like Daughters or something. I'm saying that because I like it, you know, it's like, I like Daughters. So this is a way of me relating to, you know,
Yeah.
what speaks to me about what you're doing. But not everyone takes it that way. And I try to be more careful, because sometimes people are like, oh yeah, it does sound like that, doesn't it? It's just like, well, yeah, but it's you were playing it, it's still different, you know, like, but yeah, I think it is important, I think, to be aware of a lot of different kinds of music. And I mean, I like music, period. So I listen to a lot of different stuff for my own pleasure, and that it helps because you know, if a band comes in and it helps me have an idea of what they're after. Maybe, you know, if a band came in, they sounded like Avenged Sevenfold or something.
Woo.
I wouldn't be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna make this sound like Led Zeppelin, you know. or if I had like a jazz trio, I wouldn't be like, okay, how do I make this sound like Slayer? Like, you know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
having it certainly has helped me to be versed in a lot of genres and the aesthetic demands of those genres. And yeah, it helps me do my job, and helps me communicate with people and develop rapport and those things that are important to me with in a session.
Yeah, so for the record, Andy Nelson, not just the metal dude. He knows his shit.
No, I kind of go in waves with what I listen to. So I have been listening to a little bit of black metal lately, but you know, kind of all over the place. Some black metal, a little bit of free jazz, a little bit of ambient, a little bit of you know, Renaissance choral music.
Oh, cool.
You know? Yeah, just try to find new stuff that I like.
What have you been working on musically? Like, I picked your brain about recording for like a fucking hour, which I love. But yeah, what are you working on?
Well, I technically have 2 active bands. So, like Rats, we just put out a new record, but we're not doing anything at the moment. We haven't practiced really much at all in the quarantine times. I also have a rock band called Sourmouth that I sing and play guitar in. That band also has not done much, but I do. I guess to answer your question, I've sort of been doing a lot, but also nothing at all, because I'm always writing something, not necessarily for an existing project, but there's always like a handful of riffs or song ideas, or I'll be like, you know, oh, it could be cool to start a band that sounds like this, and I'll maybe just write half a dozen songs or riff ideas that sound like that, and maybe nothing ever comes of it, but that's enough stimulation to kind of keep me going. Actually, the thing that I've probably been doing the most is I've been doing a lot of kind of, I think like a lot of people cooped up at home, is just like making kind of drones and ambient music. I have a bunch of cool synths that I've kind of gotten, I've lucked into getting through doing some repair work. And yeah, so sometimes at home I just sort of like mess around with drum machines, and I have a tape delay and some synths, and just kind of zone out and make weird sounds. None of it's for a specific project. Although I did actually score a film for a friend of mine. So I think that maybe kicked off a lot of that exploration for me. But yeah, man, I don't know. There's nothing like really concrete. I have a whole bunch of song ideas that maybe someday will become reality with Sourmouth. I have, I don't know, I almost started like a funeral doom band with my buddy. We met up once, wrote a couple riffs. I wrote like another dozen song ideas and we haven't gotten back together. So I don't know, kind of always like little ideas brewing, and maybe 10% of them become reality. But yeah, just kind of, as long as I'm playing something, that's usually enough to occupy me. Hopefully that's sort of another goal I have this year, is to try to make more music become reality, you know? So instead of just like sitting on a bunch of riffs and song ideas, actually like going to the studio that I have full access to and just being like, cool, like let's record a song today. Let's record a couple songs, you know, and put them out on Bandcamp or throw them out there.
What do you
So,
have
yeah.
synth wise? Because like, I don't know if you know this about me or not, but like I have like a modest modular setup, and I've like wasted too much fucking money getting to that. But like I am now into like synths and like pedals. So yeah, what do you have synth wise? What's going on?
I'm almost embarrassed of how nice of a collection of synths I have.
Ooh.
Just because I'm not really much of a player. I like fiddling with them and making sounds and literally just pinning a key and like turning controls and faders. But I have an ARP Odyssey Mark One.
Oh man.
I have an Electrocomp EML 101, which is actually, it's right behind me. It's that one.
What a
And then I
sexy
have
machine.
and then I have an ARP Pro DGX. I have an ARP Omni 2. I have a Roland TB303. I have a Roland TR606. I have an Oberheim DMX drum machine. I have a Juno 106. I have a Realistic MG1. That's like the
Cool.
Radio Shack Moog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
That's an impressive collection.
I have a lot of shit. Well, I worked part-time as a repair tech at a music store in Brookfield called A Sound Education. And actually, when I started there, I just worked at the front counter. And then they took on a repair business that was based in Chicago, but the guy moved it out to Brookfield, just so he could repair out there and not have to worry about having a store. He could just fix stuff. And so I started learning from him, and he's probably one of the best synth techs in the Midwest, you know, probably in the top 10 in the country for all I know. But then he retired and he moved to Louisiana, and he just had a basement full of broken stuff that he just gave to me. And over the last few years, I've just been like fixing it up and using it. And so, and some of it I just bought broken. I bought my ARP Omni 2. I bought that off Craigslist broken for like a few $100 and got that up and running. So yeah, it's like I feel sort of undeserving of all of it for how poor of a player I am. So, but I put it to use. So I feel okay. Like, okay, well, I scored a fucking film. So I've justified keeping these things around.
Yeah. What's the film called?
It's called An Intrusion. It was written and directed by a guy from Detroit named Nick Holland, who he made a previous film called Wronged. And he's sort of a budding independent horror thriller filmmaker. He's been in a couple bands that I've recorded, and that's how we got to know each other. It's like a home invasion thriller kind of horror movie. It's been fun making creepy sounds for it. So
yeah, very cool.
Yeah, there's only a trailer up right now. It's right now. I think he had distribution stuff lined up, and it all obviously went to hell with the pandemic. But so now he's just kind of like going through the distribution channels, trying to like find streaming distribution, all that jazz, to at least get it out there. I don't know where he's at with that, but hopefully it comes out some point in 2021, and I can share it with the world.
What's the biggest challenge in scoring a film? Is it like the constraint of like not trying to overpower like the visuals?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never done it before, anything or really anything like that. So it's hard to pinpoint a single. I think the biggest challenge is just like coming up with something, just the act itself, because it's just like, I mean, some scenes, it's like, okay, I'm playing it, looping the scene and playing a synth or playing a guitar and fucking around and trying to find something that seems to suit it. And then, you know, if you're lucky, you find something and you kind of chase that. And yeah, it's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of watching it over and over again. And yeah, is this doing it? Is this too much? Is it too little? Does it need more? I think there was a lot of like pressure that I feel where it's like, okay, well, this just happened. Do I need a sound to indicate, you know, like, oh, they just like turn their head. Like, does there need to be like a sound there? Or, you know, they just close this trunk of their car. There's need to be something that accents that. And it's like, well, I don't know. And also with this, because the way I was just working in scenes that were edited, but not, the audio wasn't done, like the dialogue wasn't totally done. So, and they weren't like color corrected or all that film stuff I don't know anything about. So it's sort of like rough, you know? I mean, the flow of the scenes is there, the action is there, but the look and the sound of it, you kind of have to use your imagination. So I you know, try to fill in the blanks there. Yeah, sometimes it's like writing an album kind of from scratch. I've never written an electronic music album before, or written any kind of really solo album before, let alone trying to write one that fits visuals. So it's like I said, it's hard to pinpoint an exact hardest thing, but it was certainly a rewarding challenge when you feel like you're onto something and it starts to, this feels creepy, or this I can feel I can feel it enhancing the scene, you know, the way that it comes together. That's pretty rewarding when you reach that. But getting there is definitely a process, and sometimes I stare at a scene over and over and over again, and all I have is some like single dumb synth sound. It's like, okay, well, that was a lot of work for nothing.
So two final questions. One, who are some of your favorite film composers?
You know, I'm definitely, I'm kind of a poser when it comes to that sort of thing, where I'm aware of a score when it jumps out and is cool, but I'm certainly not like dialed into the world of what's out there. I mean, obviously, like everyone loves Danny Elfman, you know, certainly not a sound that I feel like I could do, but someone I've been aware of forever. I feel like I take more influence from musicians who make stuff that could function as soundtracky. So like ambient stuff like Brian Eno, or really creepy soundscape stuff like Scott Walker, like his last few records, you know, where it's like that. Take any, you know, instrumental section of that, and that's just some horrifying scene, you know. And then I think there's a lot of artists who do kind of both worlds, like Tangerine Dream, who were making cinematic, sweeping synth music, and then were started to do that for movies, and then that just sort of became a whole genre of soundtrack music, was these big, you know, lush synth arrangements. Yeah, or, you know, like Vangelis doing the Blade Runner soundtrack, or even John Carpenter, you know, someone who I think comes from that world of influence, but then sort of made it his own in soundtrack work. That's someone else who I think John Carpenter, I would cite as an influence because he makes me feel okay about not having a whole lot for a scene, where it's like, is this one line or this one synth sound, like it feels right, but is it enough? And it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, what the fuck is that in Halloween? Dun, dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun, dun. You know, it's like, yeah, that works. That's awesome. You know, so actually, my girlfriend for Christmas, she got me a book that's a bunch of interviews with horror film score composers. So again, I'm so new to that as like a world that I don't know a lot of the names, but the guy who did like all the Hitchcock movies, you know, Vertigo and
I think Bernard Herrmann, I think.
yeah, okay, there you go. You know more than I do. The guy, you know, and then obviously John Carpenter's in there. The guy who did like the Hellraiser score. You know, so yeah, I certainly notice when a film has a cool score, but I mean, like Johan Johansson would be another person who I'm actually aware of and I admire. Rest in peace. But I think my personal influence comes more from outside of that, and it's just music that could function as a film score, even though it wasn't created for that specific purpose. Yeah, like I said, Scott Walker or Brian Eno or Klaus Schultze or anything like that, really.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're a poser. I think you have great taste in music.
Thank you.
Right. Final question. So when you played in Weekend Nachos, would you describe that band as a power violence band?
I think at its core, yes. Like the first 7-inch, definitely. And maybe even the first LP. I don't know. I don't think I'm enough of a purist to have like a super strong opinion about it. I think there are a lot of people who, you know, hated that we were called a power violence band. There were a lot of elite types who were really did not like that.
Like they thought you guys weren't like cult enough?
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, oh, they have too many parts that sound like Hatebreed, or they have too many like D-beat parts or whatever. I mean, if all we had was the first 7-inch and the first LP or whatever, the first two 7-inches and the first LP, I would say, yeah, we're a power violence band. But I think more broadly, I guess it's just kind of like a hardcore band. I don't know like what else you'd call like a hardcore band that has the variety of parts that we do and the sort of like transitions that we would have. That sort of abruptness is sort of like an important part of power violence to me. So I guess to answer your question, maybe.
And that leads to the follow-up question, like, how do you define power violence? Like, I know reading about the Endless Blockade and like the one dude, I think Andrew Nolan, he said to him power violence was that like that abrupt, exaggerated shift between fast and slow. Like, how do you feel about that definition?
That to me, that feels right. Certainly when I think of the bands that I really like who have that sound, you know, Infest or Crossed Out or whatever, that feels like the common denominator across all of those bands. There's certainly like a certain like rapid fire quality to the vocals, you know. I think, you know, sort of sustained long vocal cadences over blasts. That's not very typical of power violence. So we have to be more of that sort of like, you know, rapid fire delivery, more like punk gruffness. Yeah, I think that would definitely be a factor in that as well. But I definitely agree with his assessment. That sort of abrupt tempo shifting from fast to slow, and also in a more compact package, because you can have, you know, a Typo Negative have really abrupt tempo changes, but, you know, they're not what I would call that sort of music. But yeah, you know, and that's the sort of, it sort of feels metal, but it's still punk, and it's in a more compact structure, arrangement, but yeah, having those sort of like breakneck changes, and most significantly from fast to slow. Those kind of feel like the salient characteristics of power ballads. So, but again, I'm not like a real purist about it. I'm sure there's a numerous message board or Facebook group goers who would take issue with even Nolan's assessment.
Yeah, online nerds, good for them.
Yeah, who needs them?
Well, Andy, like, it's been so nice talking to you. I can't remember the last time like we actually talked in person. It must have been the last Imelda recording, which was 2018, maybe. Shit, is that right?
Yeah,
2019?
I think
Oh my
because it
God.
was either right before or right. I think it was right before I went to Europe with Like Rats, which was like, yeah, I don't know, two years ago or three
Wow.
years ago. I don't know, man. It's been a while, and I agree. It's been nice chatting with you, man.
Yeah, and if I had my druthers, and I probably will, I imagine New Imelda will be recorded at Bricktop with you.
Hell yeah, I'd love to.
And before we leave, where can people find your music?
Okay, so I'm no longer in. We Can Nachos are no longer a band, but obviously it is all on Spotify. Like Rats, we just put out a new LP. Dropped right before the world decided to end. So that's on Spotify. Like Rats, the new record is called Death Monolith. My rock band, Sourmouth, also on Spotify. All these bands are also on Bandcamp, and I think you can buy Like Rats LPs from Hibernation Release, who was nice enough to release our last LP. Yeah, and my handle on social media is Andy Heybro. It's not a lot of music stuff going up there, but if you like, pictures of gear and sometimes dick jokes, that's where that stuff is.
You just gotta combine the gear with the dick jokes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something with a guitar can do that. I mean, the guitar really kind of is like the extension of the dick, isn't it?
Yeah, especially like the way Daughters plays, just fast jerking off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. The really fast, like fret movements.
Yeah.
That's all that is, really.
And lastly, how can people book time at Bricktop Recording?
So you can go to the website bricktoprecording.com. There is a contact form where you can fill in some information about your band and the project, what you're after, your budget. You can also specify if you're looking to work with either Pete or I. You can also contact me directly, Andy@bricktoprecording.com. You can also message me on social media. I don't prefer that, but if that's the way you want to get in touch with me, I will not say no. So yeah, also on Bricktop Recording, there's a Spotify playlist of a bunch of stuff I've recorded. So if you're on the fence, you can hear some records I've done.
I highly recommend Bricktop, everyone.
Hey, all right. Thanks for the plug.
Well, Andy, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you have a much better 2021, and I'm sure I will see you around in the future.
Likewise, brother. Thank you very much.
All right, peace. Have a good one.
See ya. You too.